Carolina Reaper is the second hottest pepper in the world, behind Pepper X.
I'm nervous now.
Welcome back to Hot AF. We're here today with Brad Delger, who's a shareholder here. He's been here for nearly 20 years. So a good majority of his life, actually.
So almost the entire
we're gonna end it here very quickly with eating some spicy chicken wings. Well, hopefully he'll survive this. Today we're going to talk a little bit about vocational rehabilitation benefits and QRCs and dive into some spicy sauces. So first off, Brad, we're going to start with just Tabasco because it's everybody knows Tabasco. It's a pretty basic hot sauce made from the Tabasco pepper out of Louisiana. Little known thing. The only ingredients in Tabasco are the Tabasco pepper, salt, and vinegar. Nothing else. So, first question though.
Okay.
When is someone entitled to vocational rehabilitation benefits?
Well, so a couple different ways to answer that. So technically, you become entitled to vocational rehabilitation benefits as soon as you meet the criteria to be a qualified employee for vocational rehabilitation benefits. And there are three separate criteria. Essentially what it is you have to have a work-related injury that's preventing you from working in your normal job that you had before the date of injury. In practical effect, this doesn't always happen. That's when you become qualified. Not everyone requests a QRC right away. The Department of Labor and Industry mandates that a QRC be put on the case or that a request for an exception be filed if the employee's been off work for 90 days. So if there's no QRC on the case by the time 90 days of wage loss has been paid, Dolly will inform the insurer that they need to place one on the case.
And if it's a denied claim, then Dolly VRU gets involved.
Yes,
and exactly. They should be effectively being a QRC at that point. Correct?
They should be, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I want to get your thoughts on that. Standard, very vinegar forward.
Mm-hmm.
So the second hot sauce here we have, we're going to go ahead and try this. This is a jalapeno condiment, they call it. This is from Yellowbird in Texas. And this is more of a consistency of a ketchup, but it's jalapeno based. A little sweeter. Hint of smokiness.
Mm-hmm.
Good on everything.
Yeah, very good.
So when you get to the point where you're going to need a QRC, how do you pick, or who gets to pick?
Well, again, it kind of depends. So essentially, what happens a lot of the time is the insurer will put a QRC on the case, and then they're picking. Obviously, if the employee is requesting one before the insurer voluntarily puts one on, then they're picking the QRC. One thing to keep in mind is that if the insurer does put the QRC on the case, then from the time the R2 or the rehab plan is filed, the employee has 60 days to request a change of the QRC. And after that time, the QRC can only be changed for good cause. So essentially, that's kind of how who picks the QRC works.
Within that 60-day period, can we request a change of QRC?
No, so the 60-day thing only really applies to the employee. So we can always request a change of QRC, but it goes back to that higher standard of good cause.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're gonna move on to our next one here. This is called habanero key lime, and it's habanero based with some key lime juice in it, and I'm excited for this one. It's gonna be sweet, a little hotter.
All right.
Hopefully, we're gonna turn up the heat.
Oh, sweet so far. I like
It's
it.
sweet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as hot as I was expecting,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very good.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked a lot about QRCs. What is the role of the QRC in a claim here between the insurer, the employer, and the employee?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the role of the QRC is to get the employee back to work in their date of injury job or as close there to as possible. So it's a vocational benefit. So basically everything they do should be aimed at that vocational goal. So they do a lot of different things. They do what's called medical management, where they go with the employee to some of their appointments. They try and coordinate some of the appointments. basically with the goal of making sure the employee gets the treatment that's necessary to, again, get them back to work, to this basically the position that they were in before the work injury. They also do things like try and coordinate return to work. So if the employee is returning back to work after an injury, with either their date of injury employer or perhaps a new employer, some of their roles is going to be to try and, if the employee still has restrictions, try to make sure that the job duties are within those restrictions. Oftentimes they'll do what's called on-site job analysis, where they'll go to the employer's facilities and kind of observe everything, make sure that everything is actually within the restrictions that the doctor is given. If there is a need for the employee to find a different job, they can't go back to their date of injury employer. Then they will sort of supervise the job search of trying to find another job. And if there's retraining that's needed, they're often the ones that help develop that retraining plan.
Got it. With that on-site job reviews, is that something that you push for on your claims? That when you have restrictions come back, or do you really rely on the employer to provide accurate job within those restrictions?
Well, I think every claim is different. If the employer is pretty confident that they can accommodate and there's not a lot of questions, so for instance, say you have somebody who's gotten one-handed work, and pretty self-explanatory, and the employer says, yeah, we have one-handed work. In that situation, I would think it typically wouldn't be necessary for there to be an on-site job analysis. It's pretty cut or dry. I think sometimes if it's more questionable, and especially like if there's some dispute over whether or not job duties being offered are within or not within the restrictions, then I think it can be helpful to have the QRC come and sort of evaluate and give their opinion as to whether or not the job being offered is within restrictions or not, and if not, how it could be made to be so.
Okay,
yeah,
got it. Our fourth one here, we're going to go a little outside the box, and we're going to go to Taco Bell. And this is their Diablo sauce, so their hottest sauce. And we don't know what peppers are in it because it just says spices and natural flavors, but it's definitely a different flavor, more taco sauce based, and a little smoky, but it's got some heat.
Yeah, it's got some heat
that comes on over time.
Mm-hmm.
Still good though.
Yeah.
What are some situations where either the rehabilitation benefit plan will just automatically end, or reasons that we would want to try and seek to end that benefit?
So the ideal one, of course, would be that the employee completely recovers from their work injury. Obviously, no underlying work injury. Vocational rehabilitation is just like any other work comp benefit. There has to be an underlying compensable work injury for those benefits to apply. Another thing ideal situation is the employee gets back to work in their pre-injury job, without any wage loss. Basically everything, it's a permanent position, whether it need to be modified or not. But essentially at that point, there's really nothing more for the QRC to do because they're back to work in their pre-injury job, and it's a permanent situation, as permanent as anything ever is. Other times when it's more contentious when it ends, if there's a dispute over whether or not the underlying injury has ended, if there's maybe an IME that says that there's no further work injury, the treating doctors say that there is, then obviously there's a dispute over that sometimes. There's various different ways in which it could end. Sometimes the employee will just not want the services anymore for whatever reason. And sometimes, that's for whatever reason, they don't want to comply with the different job search requirements, things like that. Sometimes employees will retire from the job market and it won't be necessary. Sometimes, employees will, they will be permanently and totally disabled. In that situation, they're not entitled to vocational rehabilitation benefits because they're not going to go back to work.
Right. Presumably.
Yeah, presumably.
In terms of exposure, I know that the costs can change all the time. There's just recent statutory increases to the amount that QRCs can charge. But what are you seeing in terms of exposure for a typical case on average? And before we do that, I want to just talk about the Sweet Island Fire. This is a hot sauce from Hilton Head Island, and it includes peaches, red bell pepper, lime juice, cider vinegar, agave syrup, and Carolina Reaper mash. Carolina Reaper is the second hottest pepper in the world, behind Pepper X. So I tried this one earlier, and it's it built, but it's got some initial really nice sweetness to it. So
I'm nervous now.
it may not come out. The chicken may overpower it.
Okay.
But in terms of exposure, for what do you typically see, and what should we be, looking at setting reserves for, or expecting?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say probably a typical Voc rehab, just on an average case, is going to be, probably around $10,000, I would say. There's going to be various things you have to look to when adjusting that number. Like the severity of the injury. Typically, if you've got something like, carpal tunnel where they're having a surgery, and, typically it's something where people are, back to work with no restrictions, 6 to 8 weeks following the surgery. You need to take that into account as opposed to somebody who's having a multi-level, cervical fusion or something like that. And, was working in a heavy duty manual job and may have permanent restrictions that preclude them from ever going back there, even if they do have a successful surgical outcome. So,
in a case like that with the carpal tunnel, would you even need a QRC in that situation, because it's such a short duration procedure and there really isn't a lot of complications with that typically?
Yeah, I mean, typically no. Again, sometimes it's not up to you. If the employee qualifies and they want one, we don't really have much of a choice. But yeah, typically I would say most insurers, if the employee is not requesting one, they're not voluntarily putting one on before that 90 days is done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming by. We didn't have anything as hot as I was expecting today, but we'll ratchet it up next time. And if you have any other questions about vocational rehabilitation services, anything regarding workers' compensation defense, feel free to reach out to any of the attorneys here at Off at 40. We're happy to help and excited to talk to you. And also, if there's specific topics that you'd like to see us talk about and torture ourselves with some additional hot sauces, let us know. Please comment, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Yeah, y'all go ahead and smash that like button.